Hello and welcome to Cape Ann ARTWaves. My name is Jacqueline Ganem DeFalco, and I'm proud to bring you this member program of 1623 Studios located in Gloucester, Massachusetts. Today's program is sponsored by Prince Insurance Agency, Gibson Sotheby's International Real Estate, the McDermott McCarthy team, and Christine Fisher, visual artist, The Common Crow, and our partner, CART, Society for the Encouragement of the Arts. Cape Ann ARTWaves airs every other week on 1623 Studios, Channel 12. And on the other week, you will hear Christine Fisher, who's my co-producer and co-host of this show. Each week, we kick off with a new guest who then will be on the air for the next 2 weeks. And it's a very wonderful way to get to know our local arts community in depth. So thank you for joining me today. Today's special guest is Traci Thayne Corbett. Around town, many see Traci in her work at Art Haven, but there's so much more going on behind the scenes for Traci as she also follows her own passion in art. So today, most of our focus will be on Traci and her art. And so I'm going to kick off our show today by asking Traci to tell us a little bit about her journey when she began to understand and appreciate her own artistic talent and how she came to where she is today as an artist. So welcome, Traci.
Thank you, Jackie. This is exciting. I don't talk about myself and my art that much, so this is kind of fun and a little strange for me. But yeah,
it's a good thing to do every now and then, right?
No, it is actually. Preparing for this was really helpful for me. It helped me think about my own art a little differently, so I appreciate the opportunity. And you asked, how this all started, and so I'm one of those kids that I was drawing forever. Like, I don't know when I started. I remember being like 3 years old and drawing on these little pads that my grandmother would get us. And it seemed like from then on, I was just Traci the artist. I drew horses endlessly. I wanted to be a horse. Then I drew the horses, then all that, all through grade school, all through high school. And when I went to college, though, I went for art. I went to Clark University, but I wanted to go to a school also with other disciplines because I liked so many other things. And I think I may have taken art for granted because I'd always done it and always been able to do it. And always, so I discovered graphic design at school. And I just thought that was the most interesting, cool thing to combine creativity and art with business and with communication. And I just hadn't been exposed to that. And I loved the idea of it. And so I jumped into it. I kept painting, kept drawing and all that, but that's what I really went after. And probably because I could see a clear path to a job, I wound up having someone who started to collect my art from a high school art show. And she offered me work in graphic design. So, you kind of just, I went that way. And it was fun, but what happened is I wound up in a corporate environment where I was a graphic designer, but I quickly learned it was a smaller startup t-shirt company that became really big. And I noticed that the people that were making the decisions about what art we'd put on t-shirts or who we'd, what art we would do, how we would do it, and then also who got to travel and go meet all the accounts were the product managers and directors. And I'm like, hold up. I want to do that. I didn't want them. It was kind of the way I am. Like, I kind of like to organize things and manage them. And I thought, hold up, I can decide what art should go. I know his art's better. I know this one, so I directed myself that way and wound up with a really fun long number of years in product management, product direction, leadership within apparel and footwear companies.
Consumer goods, right?
Consumer goods, yeah. I didn't know the jobs existed when I was in college. I didn't know you could do that. And that people would pay you at the time. You got paid as a product manager, at least the type I was, because they vary industry to industry. I got paid to understand the market I got paid to understand what was hot, what was trending. I got paid to shop.
Yeah.
And right, I mean, that was like,
Funny thing, right?
oh, it was a dream at the, it was such a fun thing. But you were really paid to see commonalities in the world and how certain pieces were fitting together to then have your brand fit into it.
Right.
How would you fit
Right.
into the world as it is at this point in time? And it was super fun. So I did that for a long, long time. And along the way, I led creative teams, worked with creative people, and my perspective as a practicing artist, I mean, I practice not as much as I would like to, but I did. It helped me lead creative teams and understand what our designers were dealing with. But having that, being on the other side of the business, I could also explain to them what they needed to know to be able to get their creative vision expressed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it worked out really well. I mean, who knew? So that I did that for a long time. And during my vacations and breaks and everything, I'd take workshops. I studied, I went to this portrait workshop with Daniel Green. We'll talk about influences later, but it was my fun. That's what I did for art. And then when was Skylar born? 2008. When I had my daughter, things kind of changed because my job required, the type of job I had required lots of travel.
Sounds like a transition point, right?
It wasn't dramatic. Yeah, it wasn't one I saw coming, to be honest, because I never imagined that I wouldn't do that job.
Yep. Yeah.
Because it was in many ways a dream. And for years, it was in many ways just like the best thing I could imagine. But then then I have this little girl who's super awesome and I wanted to be there. There were more things, different things I wanted. So yeah, big transition. And so I wound up, I was here in Gloucester. I had moved a few years prior to be here. My husband's from here. I fell in love with it. I did come here because of him, but honestly, I fell in love with it too.
Right. And so tell us about how you returned to your art, because that is now your major focus. So what was that transition and when was your sort of coming out party, so to speak?
Well, what happened was I just, when all of the things that I kind of thought were most important to me changed, all of a sudden I'm not traveling. I'm not the girl that was just in China last week. And I'm not I'm not shopping for work and buying myself cool clothes. I'm not doing all that. I was like, wow, now what? But I always was the artist and I still did that. And so it's like, it was always in my back pocket. And I probably I would have liked to maybe put it more to the fore, but I started doing it more. And I noticed with my daughter, as I was trying to get her into art, I was kind of elbowing her out for materials. I'm kind of like, no, let's get acrylic paints. Let's get these good ones, or let's try this. And I brought her to Art Haven to volunteer. I thought that would be a cool thing. Let's learn about this. And really quickly, I figured out, while she likes art and she's super creative, she's more of a theater girl. I was way into it. And I started one class I was in with her. I think we'll probably look at a painting. I started painting and I did this portrait. And I had been trained in portraits. My art classes all through being a kid were portraits and that sort of work. And I did this portrait of my husband.
Oh, yes. And we're going to have that up on the screen right now. So tell us a little bit about the sketch of Steve.
Yeah, well, what's funny is I almost felt awkward doing it. I felt like, I haven't painted forever. And I had a picture in my wallet. I just grabbed the picture I had of him and I was like, gosh, I'm going to do this. And I painted it. And using acrylics, which I hadn't ever used before. Honestly, I'd worked with oils. Wow. And I looked at it and I'm like, oh, wow, I still can do this. Like, now I look at it, there's some things, you're always neurotic, like might change this, that, but I really was so happy with it, the immediacy, and that I got a likeness, which was always really important to me to get, like, it's him, it's not his brother, it's not his cousin, someone who looks sort of like him, it was him.
And what was his reaction?
He was like, oh, well, he's very supportive. He's like, well, yeah, I've seen your work. You can draw. He's like, that's great. He's like, I really like it. And there was someone working at Art Haven at the time. And she came over and I think she expected it to be, maybe not as sophisticated, whatever. And she's like, Traci, why aren't you doing this all the time? And I was like, yeah, good question.
So when did you start working at Art Haven?
I started volunteering at Art Haven
Okay.
in
All
like
right.
2011, 12, something like that.
Oh,
A long
oh,
time ago. And
yeah.
I just started volunteering and then maybe a little later, but something like
Yeah.
that. And then I started teaching a painting class soon thereafter. And I just,
Okay.
it was just the place that I,
You've had about 10 years really where you've been able to get really engaged there is what you're saying.
yeah,
Either as a volunteer or working there. Yeah. So
yeah,
that's great. I want to move on because I want to see more of your work and want to
yeah,
hear more about your process and, the types of people that influence you. So let's talk about influences because you have studied with a lot of artists according to everything I read about you in your bio.
yeah.
And I'd like to know those that have been influential, and maybe you can talk about that and a little bit how your work has evolved.
Yeah, well, I honestly think I've gotten the most direction from studying with other artists, either in person or
Mhm.
making myself a student of their work. When I was a kid, Maurice Easter, he used to do pastel drawings in the Royal Ridge Mall. People,
Oh,
yeah. Well, I studied with him when I was a kid. But then, as I was saying, when I was working in corporate, I took a lot of workshops, and I worked with Mark
mhm.
Hayden, who's a regional portrait painter. I took a workshop with Daniel Green, who was also a very accomplished portrait artist, among others, in ongoing classes. But then when I came here to Gloucester, I started right away going to the North Shore Art Association, to the different galleries, and I saw Jeff Weaver's work and
Mm.
Charlie Movalli's, and I'm like, hold up, like this, because Gloucester was pretty new to me.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so I was like all amazed by these boats, and you can just drive to the Stop and Shop and you can see the views like people get on planes too.
Yeah.
And I come out front door and it's like the most gorgeous sunset ever since yesterday,
Mhm.
and these cruddy boats that look so cool with the light on them, all that stuff. I just was hypnotized by it. And then to see the way Jeff paints it, these utilitarian scenes so beautifully and poetically, and Charlie Movalli, how his work had that energy, and you could tell he just loved getting into those cruddy low tide, it's all
Mhm.
mud and fallen boats, and he made it so gorgeous. And I said, that's I'm going there. That's what I
So
want to
tell
do.
me what you think of the works that you have set aside for this interview. What's
Yeah.
your most Movalli-esque work to date? If we
Yeah.
could aspire to be a Charlie Movalli, right?
Yeah, well, and that's saying a lot, right? So
Right.
if you can see that slight influence, I'll be happy.
Right.
Yeah, and it's Rocking at Golden Hour is one that's most recent. I did it right at the beginning. I think I started it before the pandemic.
Mm.
And this one was part of a series that and I can talk about my process with that, but
Mhm.
I had started this, I like working in series. And so this one, um, I wanted to do because where I live in East Gloucester, and all of us know this in the area, that at golden hour, whenever sunset is in the summer,
Mhm.
if it's like 7:30 or around now, I don't even know when it is. I'm so confused with the time change, but it's when it happens, all of a sudden we're all bathed in this light.
Yeah.
The sun's low over Niles Beach, and you just get this salmon light that like changes everything.
Yep.
And things that are muddy and not so pretty all of a sudden have like gold on them. It's ridiculous. And
Mhm.
I tried to capture that with this painting, and I was able. And what I was happy about is that I felt like my brush strokes were um, light and not studied. I didn't go back and futz with it.
Yeah.
I let
Gotcha.
the paint do its thing and let the colors sit there. And I was happy with it.
Well, we're going to send that energy up to Charlie Movalli and hope some more comes down, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. He's
How
all
about
that guy's everywhere. It's awesome.
I know he's amazing. So there were some other folks you mentioned, Alyssa Monks,
Yep.
and Emmanuel De Souza. So
Yeah.
tell us what specific types of influence, and then in your mind, what sort of came out of thinking about them or working with them.
Well, those two artists were two that I've come upon in the past couple of years.
Hmm.
And what happened is I've done a lot of marine scenery, which I love. And I just started to feel like I was exploring, I noticed when I was looking at art, there were other things I was responding to. And I thought, well, it'd be nice to incorporate that into my art. Alyssa's work is, she's a New York City painter, figurative art, and she's very expressive and realistic at the same time. You can feel the material, you can see the brush strokes.
Yeah.
But honestly, at some points, certain areas of her work, you can back up and it almost looks photographic, but it's very lush. And I was able to study with her, and her approach and her level of reverence for what painting is was really inspiring. And then Emmanuel De Souza is someone I found him on Instagram, and his painting came up actually because another artist I follow bought it. It came up in her feed and it just blew me away. He does this beautifully rendered and painted figures, but then he combines them with some backgrounds and elements that are more abstract or less finished. And that combination of really great technical skill with expression, I just loved it. I thought it was really interesting.
And so how did you reflect that in your recent work?
Well, I've done a couple of things that were influenced by Emmanuel De Souza, and I am certainly not done, but I just did a small portrait that it's done. I may add a little highlight here, there, but of my daughter, Skylar 11. And I learned some actually specific technical skills, technical aspects that I wanted to try out in this. So I did an underdrawing in charcoal, and this is on a gessoed panel. And then I went into it with acrylic paint that I'd added medium to, so it felt more like oil, and layers. So it was more translucent, then you layer it up. And his method of painting it's very classical, honestly. But he inspired me, I guess, to devote myself more to it, was putting on the paint and moving on. Like, don't futz.
Good. I like that.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to move on because our time is clicking away here,
Yes.
and we want to make this as engaging as possible for our audience. That's our
Sure.
goal. So I want to go back to your artistic statement, because I think it says a lot about you. And I want to read it. It says, "When I take the time to draw something, to focus on it, learn all of its little details, I can't help but get drawn into the whole story. I think about what makes that particular subject unique. For example, why is this boat so rusty? Or isn't it cool how the waves make the reflections look like lightning? How the summer air makes a haze over the boatyard?" So with that as a backdrop, maybe share with us one story you're proud of where you really feel that you did capture the story.
Yeah, it's always funny to hear things you wrote, right? You're like, well, but I do feel that way. When you draw or paint something, you're paying such close attention to it. Then what do you do that with in your life, right? I mean, you're so focused on every detail. And I did this one painting that it was called "Beautiful Ain't Always Pretty," which I love naming things like that. It cracks me up. But this boat, I was obsessed with this boat. I took a bunch of pictures of it. Its name was kind of coming off, so I can't even tell you the exact name. But it's covered in rust, and it looked like it should have sank years ago. And something about it was so beautiful and cool because he worked so hard. That boat had worked hard. And so in the painting, I wanted to convey that it was beautiful, but not make it a pretty painting, because it's not pretty. It is what it is.
Yeah, it has character.
It's character, and it's almost like it's
Right.
kind of like what Gloucester is. And yes, there's beautiful sunsets and all that, and those are no denying. You don't need. Sometimes I feel like I don't even need to paint as much of those because they're already gorgeous. But what's pretty about this rusty old boat?
Right.
Like dead fish.
So you tried to tell its story. Right?
I did. I wanted to make sure that it looked like it revealed its character.
Yeah, absolutely. So we mentioned process before, and this is pretty important. I really love to hear different perspectives on that. So talk about how you start a piece, how you iterate, how you know when you're done, and if it happens to be top of mind, any problems you've had to solve along the way. but you do have a very specific process. So I think it's important to share that.
Yeah, well, it's funny because you asking the question made me think about it more. And it's actually a process I use with almost everything I do. And I try really hard to think about something before I do it. I don't always succeed, but with paintings, I try to think about why am I going to spend the next however many hours doing this, or what would I like to spend this number of hours doing? And for me, so often it's been Gloucester and revealing all these cool vignettes that are around me. So what I do is I take lots of pictures, I'll collect images of things I like. It may not necessarily be, say I have a bunch of paintings and I'm obsessed with painting the Inner Harbor in winter. So I think that's really cool. So I've taken a bunch of pictures, I've edited them so they're cropped the way I like them. And I also collect images of just things I'm into, because usually if I like a certain dress or something, there's something about the line of it or something about the pattern that's gonna reflect it's something I'm into right now. And so I kind of put them all together and just play with it and look at it. And then I just start to pull out images like, oh, that would be a fun painting and that would look nice next to that one. And so I created an idea for a series. Whether or not I do them all, it doesn't really matter. It kind of gets me excited for what could be.
Right.
And that's how I try to start as much as possible.
Right.
And change it and allow change. So allow, like, as you go along, you play with things and ideas that come to you. If I said they're all going to be acrylic 16 by 20 on gessoed panel, like the one we're going to talk about was almost like a accident that.
Right. So we have this painting whose name is Not Sure, but I Like It. Or not, is it Not Sure, but I like that, that I like it? Or is it Not Sure,
No, but I like it because
but I like it?
yeah, this painting and the naming, I don't know, it's just silly, but it made me, because that painting was basically, it's under the dock and it's the reflections. So under the dock is probably the nastiest place in Gloucester. You don't want to be there. But it creates these great reflections and this great dark line. And so I like that side of things. I think it's cool. And this painting happened because I had the photograph that I had taken and I cropped it and made it the way I liked it, and as to use for reference. And I started painting it and I wasn't happy with the way things were coming out. And so I decided, I've got this, it's called Duralar. It's like Yupo. It's like almost like a plastic sheet of plastic, and it's got this frosty side. And I said, I'm going to try painting on that. Maybe it'll make my brush stroke smoother. Maybe I'll be happier with it. And I loved it. I was so happy with it. And it fit with a series, and it actually was my favorite of the group that I had done. And it just, I don't know, the process kind of sets you up to have things like that happen.
Right, right. Oh, that's great. I mean, I was just looking at the, the one thing that you didn't talk about yet was the biggest problem that you've had to solve with art, and I think it's a little bit of a surprise because it's not so much the artistic process, if I understand you correctly.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, it's really just about. I think everybody has this issue with things. It's just allocating enough time. So that like that story I just told you, that accident only happened because I allowed myself a few hours to play around.
Right.
If you're on a deadline, if you're working, it's harder to get the happy accidents to happen.
It's the balance. It's the balance. I totally get it. You're preaching to the choir.
I know you do.
Anyway.
Yes. Yeah.
So, I could go on forever. I really enjoy your work, Traci. It's really colorful, and it's, you have to keep at it because you're doing great work.
Thank you.
But we do know that you have another job, fortunately now related to art at Art Haven. So let's just talk briefly about the work you've done for Art Haven in support of other artists, in particular young artists. And, what have you learned during your time there, and then what you hope to accomplish going forward?
Yeah, thank you. It's always fun to talk about Art Haven since it played such a big role in my transitioning to this part of my life. So it's really fun. At Art Haven, we're able to provide art education to our community, and we have making sure everybody comes. So we offer financial scholarships for about half of our classes,
Mm.
and it's been wonderful. I feed off of my students. Teaching teaches me.
Mm.
It's a cliche, but also just being around all these kids that create is super fun and energizing. And what I've learned, especially in this past crazy year, is how much Art Haven means to the community and
Mm.
what art can do. Art's always been important, and I completely believe in it's important in enriching someone's life, enriching a child's education in particular.
Mhm.
But in this time when so much was taken away,
Mm.
so much. I mean, kids, to talk about kids, because we know adults, right, too, we
Yeah.
lost a lot. Kids couldn't go to birthday parties. They didn't get like a gift for no reason for showing up at the birthday
Right.
party, all
Right.
these different things. So being able to, we provided art kits. We provided over 2,000 in the time frame through the pandemic. We've given them out with our partners in the community. Um, and just what that did for kids, or being able to offer the classes, it offers people a place to feel connected and express themselves.
Yeah, I just when I saw your letter about that, I thought it was amazing. Just kudos to you. Kudos to the volunteers that I'm sure helped. It was that's a big effort. 2,000 art kits. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, well, it's funny, Jackie, at the time it was like, what, well, that we are doing this. I mean, we have to. That's our job, is to figure out how to get this out there.
Yeah.
And then as you enlist more people, it gets bigger. But yeah, thank you for saying, but I think it
Yeah.
gave us something to focus on too, which is
Yeah.
great.
I think you said to me that your goal is to be creative and brave in decision making and ensuring that Art Haven continues to be successful. And you just seem like you're just a great person to carry that on, which is great. So speaking of that, Art Haven,
Mhm.
give us something to look forward to, because you guys always have something in the back pocket, some event coming up. And I know events are particularly challenging right now, but I do think you have something extremely creative that you're working on. So tell us about that.
Well, we're fortunate that we've been able to be back in class, just at lower class numbers,
Mm-hmm.
so we're back. We've just had what are we in now? We had February vacation, we have April vacation coming up. We are planning our summer programming for elementary and middle school kids. And we're also planning, because we're not doing as many events as we normally would, I want to do something new and fun. So we're figuring out how to do some mobile art this
Great.
summer. And we're going to be bringing out, I'm not sure how exactly, I'm renting a van, I think, at this point, and I'm going to be bringing art supplies out with our instructors, and we're going to be working with our partners at Gloucester Housing, the YMCA, at Pathways for Children, and to have like the old school bookmobiles.
Yeah, yeah, great. An art bus, so to
An
speak,
art
right?
bus, bring it
By
out and
any
bring it
other
to life.
name. That's
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
Well, we're going to look for that, because it's going to be hopefully it'll be colorfully painted, or we'll know it's coming, right?
Oh yeah, we'll,
Balloons and all kinds of things.
oh yeah, yeah, we'll doll it up
Yeah,
for sure.
that sounds great. Oh, very exciting, Traci. So let's just get back to you quickly and say, how do you like to be found? Tell us about where you are online and or otherwise.
Yeah, well, pretty much I'm on Instagram is my favorite social media. So
Okay.
I'm at Traci Thayne Corbett. I post my work in process and ideas. I also tend to bake cookies when I can't paint. It's like my alternate creativity.
Okay.
So anyway, so you'll see that too. And then I have my website. It's
Okay.
www.tracithaynecorbett.com.
Great.
So my work
Super.
is there. Yeah, and I also feel very lucky to work with Jan Charles's gallery. So I'm able to participate in a number of her shows, which is lovely.
That's great. Well, we know we love the Charles Gallery. Had the honor of interviewing Jan, earlier this season. So that's great. So Traci, that it's been fun getting to know you. Looking forward to sharing your work. I think we're going to wrap up today.
Okay.
So just want to thank our audience. I want to thank our musicians, Steve Lacey and Pat Verga, who provided lovely music. And once again, acknowledge all of our sponsors and our very important partner, C Arts. so that everybody can sign up for the CARTS eBlast to see this interview and Traci's work in the coming weeks. And for looking forward to our next ARTWaves interview, this one and the following weeks on YouTube, on Instagram, and on Facebook, and also on Twitter. So you can find us in many ways, and of course on Channel 12. So that wraps up this edition of ARTWaves, and thank you, Traci Thayne Corbett, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Bye-bye.